Swabhâva. So, where to begin? Within the Point Loma Theosophical tradition, as far as I know, it's the only place elaborated after Blavatsky much about Swabhâva. And within that, I know from talking with people who were there with Jita Parukar that Swabhâva is considered perhaps one of all the seven jewels, even though it's not the top one. It's most difficult to understand in its correct perspective because it has very subtle connotations that have to do with human psychology as well. So within the close students of Parukar, the person who wrote and delved into the understanding of Swabhâva the most was Helen Todd. Helen Todd was Parukar's literary secretary. So, for example, in her work with Parukar, it was she that worked with him on putting together the esoteric tradition when they traveled and spent about a year and a half or a little longer in England in the early 1930s. So she had a lot of close interaction with Parukar and, frequent discussions and comments about things. Anyway, so I'm relying on her. This is mostly her work, not mine, in a sense, to try and lay the foundation of some ideas about Swabhâva. So first I wrote on the board, who can read it there, Swabhâva, and then she uses the term essential wholeness, which I found quite and broadening and deepening at the same time. We can use the idea essential characteristic, but essential wholeness, and also using the word essential, I think is a little more helpful than using the word unique. But it's not an easy concept. If we use the word unique, it might go into too solid a sense of identity. Essential is something ever expanding. Because what is the essence, ultimately? It's universal. So here's something talking about self-becoming to the universal. It needs to be kept in mind. So quoting here, the secret doctrine teaches the fundamental identity of all souls with the universal oversoul, the latter being itself an aspect of the unknown root. And the obligatory pilgrimage for every soul, a spark of the former, or you could use the word monad here, which leads into this understanding of monadology and both our separate identity and our essential wholeness. The obligatory pilgrimage for every soul, a spark of the former, through the cycle of the incarnation or necessity in accordance with cyclic and karmic law during the whole term. In other words, no purely spiritual buddhi, divine soul, can have an independent conscious existence before the spark which issued from the pure essence of the universal sixth principle or the oversoul has passed through every elemental form of the phenomenal world of that manvantara and be acquired individuality. going through all the stages of evolution. So Swabhâva has to do with that evolutionary force, which that Richard will touch on. But and going from the particular to the universal. So here I wrote the meaning of the word, which everyone's familiar with, I think. So the meaning, is again this essential self-becoming. So this implies that there is in every being its own particular aspect or quality of self. So Parukar calls this essential characteristic. So we have a double significance. First, the essential characteristic or inherent quality of each and every being, and then becoming aware of and finally becoming this essential self, an ongoing creative process continuing throughout the Manvantaric cycle. First, there is just an unconscious, impelling urge functioning in elemental forms, then an instinctual type of self-expression in the lower kingdoms, and progressively a developing individuality, activated first by natural impulse and then by self-induced and self-devised efforts in the human kingdom. I'm catching up here, I'm not sure what our... C.G. Jung considers the ego as that part of the psyche which is conscious, while the self, capital S, is a term he reserves for denoting the totality of the psyche, embracing both the conscious and the unconscious. The aim in life is towards wholeness, where the unconscious is brought out into consciousness and completely mastered. As this is progressively achieved, the person comes to lead a more intelligent and more liberated existence, free from the small, confined egoism which functions within a narrow circle. This process of self-becoming, Jung calls the way of individuation, but because he does not consider the possibility of a succession of earth-life experiences for the ego, he maintains that this wholeness is never fully realizable, maintaining nevertheless the highest goal of earthly existence. Then here's another example from Buddhist schools. And this is from Theravada tradition, which, but it's said here, last is beautifully illustrated in one of the Buddhist scriptures where the following conversation takes place between King Milinda and the Venerable Bhante Nagasena. Milinda asks the sage to give an illustration of the absence of a fixed personal identity in man. He says, "It is as if, Your Majesty, a man were to light a light, would it shine all night? Assuredly, Bhante, it would shine all night. Pray, Your Majesty, is the flame of the first watch the same as the flame of the middle watch? Nay, verily, Bhante, is the flame of the middle watch the same as the flame of the last? Nay, verily, Bhante, says the Buddha. Pray then, Your Majesty, was there one light in the first watch, another light in the middle, and a third light in the last watch? Nay, verily, Bhante, through connection with the first light there was light all night. In exactly the same way, Your Majesty, do the elements of being join one another in serial succession. One element perishes, another arises, succeeding each other as it were instantaneously. Therefore, neither as the same nor as a different person do you arrive at your latest aggregation of consciousness." So I think the key there is neither the same nor different. Does this make sense? Yeah? Is anyone the same as they were this morning? I hope not. Are we also the same as this morning? I hope so. In different ways, yeah. So both of these, the Jungian and the Buddhist, contain the idea of a becoming. And as with all valid systems, they can both be studied to great advantage, each contributing and accentuating one special phase of this deep subject. Comparing them with the various classifications of man's consciousness centers given in the esoteric philosophy can be very rewarding. According to this latter teaching, man is a composite being while active in earth life. Elements and principles which originate in the cosmic hierarchy contribute their potencies to the egoic centers that make up the complete human hierarchy. We often find that the word self is used to denote these various centers, and we must then use distinguishing forms to differentiate them. I don't have this written out there, but of course, as in Blavatsky's Voice of the Silence, it's confusing and challenging because sometimes it's lowercase self, sometimes italicized lowercase self, and then capital S, lowercase ELF, and then capital S ELF. So this is a way in English of trying to talk about this evolving centers of wider consciousness. So therefore it's been customary to use the Sanskrit term Atman with qualifying descriptive prefixes. So here we have Atma, the divine self, Jivatma, the spiritual self, Bhutatman, the human self, Pranatman, the personal self, linked together by Sutratma, the thread self. Yeah.
Please speak a little bit slower.
Ah, okay. Yeah. I will try to go slower. So in this linkage here, the Sutratma is important to understand this, what connects us. How are we connected through these levels of awareness? So the Sutratma would be called that consciousness stream, or rather stream of consciousness life, which is the fundamental and individual selfhood in every entity, and which, reflected in and through the several intermediate vehicles of the invisible constitution of man, produces the egoic centers of self-conscious existence. I think that's kind of important. So the Sutratma is our sense of self. Does that make sense? That's from Perukar in the Occult Glossary. I think I'll read it again. Monica's the thread self, or Sutratman. So you can imagine, what is this? Thread. We fall asleep at night, we dream, we fall completely unconscious, and we wake up in the morning, and we don't reinvent a new sense of identity, yet we are different. So what's connected everything together? Or, we were all children growing up with ideas and things, and then we evolve and things change, and here we are looking back and we say, well, that's me. Well, it doesn't look like me. Different ideas, different emotions, different context. So what is connected? No, not yet. So again, the thread self can be called that consciousness stream, or stream of consciousness life, which is the fundamental and individual selfhood, capital S-E-L-F hood, in every entity, and which, reflected in and through the several intermediate vehicles of the invisible constitution of man, produces the egoic centers of self-conscious existence. So the thread self Sutratman produces the egoic centers, not the other way around. Interesting, huh? All the above, together with the physical body and its astral model, make up the totality of man during his repeated periods of life on earth. So again, to repeat a little bit differently, the term Swabhâva has a dual meaning. First, the essential characteristic of any entity, and B, the process of realizing or becoming that essential nature. So if we fall just on the idea of essential characteristic without the process part, this is incomplete. We need both pieces for this idea to be seen clearly and grasped in our experience. As with many concepts which in their greatest scope are almost beyond human comprehension, the first meaning of Swabhâva is sometimes narrowed down and diminished in significance to denote something quite superficial. For instance, to some it has almost become synonymous with the term human nature in the pejorative or negative sense. That is denoting nothing more than a foible or idiosyncrasy of some human being. A characteristic of that person, to be sure, but going no deeper than the everyday human self. Yet it might be said in passing that even this illustration cannot be discarded as entirely false. So it's like, this is like, okay, we're going this way, this way, this way, getting closer to an understanding of this idea of self-becoming. It may contain a tiny grain of truth, for that definite and unique Swabhâva, intrinsic to each and every entity, is in its present manifestation but a tentative and temporary expression of the inward reality. So where what happens to be in evolution at that point, okay, that's kind of is the Swabhâva, or reflecting it. We as human beings, in our gropings and fumblings towards self-knowing, often exhibit a mere caricature, a cosmic distortion of that capital R reality. What we are searching for in this article is the answer to the question, why is it that every human being is inherently different from every other? If it is equally true that we all derive from the one life, uniqueness and one life, what is actually meant by each one of us having his own Swabhâva? Okay, now any questions for a moment before I continue?
Yeah, I was looking at that. I think it would make it easier for myself. I was substituting self with awareness. Not the human awareness, personal awareness. The spiritual awareness, the divine awareness. Now, am I way off the mark?
Yeah, that's fine. That would be fine. Yeah.
It was just easier for me to comprehend.
Sure.
I had a hard time, because the word self means a lot, but I'm not really sure what it means. Does that mean just me? Does that mean just you? Or anyway, that's simple. I just substituted it for awareness, and it started making a little more sense to me. Okay.
All right, yeah. Mr. Dreas? Not yet. Huh?
Well, I think you merely have to modify the Swabhâva, of course, with karma, and you understand why we are all unique.
So here's a quotation to ponder a little bit from Parukar. we as human beings exist. This is really difficult because we as human beings exist. But in the very essence of things, we as humans are not. There is the key. It is a matter of Maya, of Mahamaya, cosmic illusion, and freedom, moksha, or liberation. Mukti, or freedom, consists in shaking off this illusion that, for instance, the musician is different from the music he gives us, or that the poet is other than the poetry he brings to us, or that the seer is different from the vision he sees. The twain, or two, are one. Is a man different from the love which fills his heart? There is the key. Parukar continues, we do exist as human beings, as individuals, and we shall exist throughout the entire duration of the cosmic or solar manvantara, as individuals constantly growing greater and vaster, ever more sublime, until finally we shall reach the grand and final consummation of all things. He put the Latin there, consummatum est. Right? The final summation of all things at the end of the solar manvantara, or solar cycle, and blossom out as full-blown gods. And when the cosmic pralaya, or end, sets in, which many men, even Theosophists, in their ignorance and blindness, look upon with dread, then even the divinity of our being will be drawn into the fullness, into the indescribable, unspeakable, ineffable fullness of quasi-infinity. The dewdrop has returned once again into the shining sea. The little consciousness of the human God has become once again the untrammeled and cosmic consciousness of the universal divinity. The many have re-become the one. Any comment, question? Monica?
I don't have any comment, but it's really an illusion, and I cannot let go of it. It's what he says, that men exist and then human beings don't exist. The beauty of his quote, it's amazing. And it means that everything, all my systems are helping me at this moment. But it looks like I will let go of them later. What can I say?
Essential self, the one in the many. So once our goal is fixed in our consciousness, the attainment of knowledge of and becoming at one with our essential self, there is no circumstance in our life, no object, no person that one meets that does not give us a clue as to what is and what is not the true way. That's quite a statement, yeah. Observation and awareness are excellent teachers. There are, moreover, many books of ethical precepts which are treasured by all aspirants, while on the other hand, there are uncounted numbers of self-culture systems which do not necessarily bring the desired ends, since they often tend to focus on the personal self in however seemingly elevated terms. One simple precept given by Blavatsky is better than perhaps all of these. Quote, to reach nirvana, one must reach self-knowledge. and self-knowledge is of loving deeds the child. So through compassionate activity becomes the path to liberation or ultimate of nirvana. We call attention again to our opening citation from Blavatsky, where she speaks of, which I didn't read earlier, self-induced and self-devised efforts. This means nothing if it does not indicate that the effort to reach our goal must eventually be made from within ourselves. Zen Buddhism is, of course, full of such admonitions. Dr. D.T. Suzuki writes of a Zen pupil who asked his master, "What is Zen? What is reality? What is truth?" The master replied, "Well, I can tell you, but what I tell you is not yours, it's mine. Truth must be found in yourself. What you can have from others does not belong to you. If there is any satori or awakening, that must take place within yourself." When the goal is finally won and the aspirant becomes the awakened one, what then? What of Gautama Buddha's teaching that there is no abiding principle in man, only an ever becoming? At this point, we need not be concerned with metaphysical dialectics. Nevertheless, this question is germane to our subject. Then she gives a quote from the Mahatma letters. Mahatma K.H. writes to Sinet, "My brother, I have been on a long journey after supreme knowledge. I took a long time to rest. Then, coming back, I had to give all my time to duty and all my thoughts to the great problem. It is all over now. The New Year's festivities are at an end, and I am, quote, self once more. But what is self? Only a passing guest whose concerns are all like a mirage of the great desert." So there we have it. Even the spiritual self is transitory from the cosmic standpoint, though useful as long as there is work to be done in the manifesting worlds. It is as though all our selves, in quotes, are but robes which the eternal pilgrim wears along the way back to the cosmic source. But he takes back with him the rich treasure he has found within himself to return it to the heart from which he journeyed forth in the uncountable eons of the past. This is the essence of the doctrine of Swabhâva. Our selves are transitory, but as part of the one, we are immortal. Within the circle of the one becoming the many, and the many returning to the one, the evolutionary journey is accomplished. The fullness of this doctrine is beyond human comprehension. The becoming is our present concern. Anyway, any other questions or comments? Richard has more to add to this, I think.